this has to do with an LMD property owner election. And the LMD stand for Landscape Maintenance Districts. And they appear on your property tax bill. Okay? And the reason why we can do that is because Proposition 218 was passed in 1996. And this is these are wordings that come right out of the proposition. And it said, in the past, local government agencies were not required to obtain ballot approval from the property owners before levying street lighting assessments. Now, if you know anybody that lives particularly on the East Coast, you know that when those municipalities in New York, New Jersey, in those areas, when they don't have enough money, they just go reassess the property and collect more. So I have some relatives back there. Both of them have houses valued, well, before the crash, of a little under $400,000, and their property tax bill was $20,000 a year. So you can see that they were, when I was there last time, whenever someone mentions Proposition 13, which they know a lot about, there's a lot of grumbling going on. But that is really true. That's what happens. The municipality is out of money. They want to go do something, so they just raise the taxes. Now, only city council approval was required, even if there was significant protest during that process, when that process was the way it was before Proposition 218. And that's the way it is, like I said, in a lot of municipalities on the East Coast. So Proposition 218 affected agencies. They affected the counties, the cities, and other special districts. And new rules came up about what you can and you cannot do. So Proposition 218 was called the Right to Vote on Taxes Act. Keep that in mind when we go through this presentation and start talking about what happened in our recent election. It was called the Right to Vote on Taxes Act. And it limits the methods by which local government can decide they're going to tax you. And it limits them to be able to create or increase taxes and fees and charges unless they get your consent, and you being the property owner, because Proposition 218 deals with property. Proposition 218 requires voter approval prior to the implementation or increase of general taxes, assessment, and certain user fees. Anybody here from Friendly Valley? All right. You probably heard that it's going to be 2 years after this election, which supposedly passed. It was going to be 2 years before they actually was going to tax Friendly Valley. The reason why I believe they did that is because they're not allowed to tax you because they haven't built what they were going to tax you on, and that are the medians between Friendly Valley Parkway and Via Princesa. Now, I thought it was interesting. I was wondering if maybe someone from Friendly Valley contacted the city, because I remember when they did the same thing down in Soledad and came to us and said, okay, we're going to tax you, really not me, but Rick Drew, he lives on that street, on a street that's in that district, but you won't see any benefit for at least 1 year after they collect the first tax. That didn't seem like it complied with this either. So keep those things in mind. Proposition 13, in difference, constrains the government's ability to raise property taxes, which was the main way most groups, most governmental agencies, local government agencies, financed their business. It also specified that any local tax imposed to pay specific government programs, a special tax, like the special library tax, remember when we were talking about that? Requires a 2/3 majority vote. So pretty much what they're saying here is, if we're going to implement a special tax, we need 2/3 majority of the voters to approve it. Proposition 218, on the other hand, says, if we're going to implement a fee that's related to the benefit of a piece of property, a majority of the homeowners, property owners, have to approve it. It is a different concept. So Proposition 218 amended the California Constitution. Now, the California Constitution is an interesting document because, you know, unless you've actually gone and read it, looked at it, when someone says to you, California has a constitution, you think of the United States Constitution, right? And the United States Constitution is a relatively high document. It sets pretty much boundaries and goals, but then it leaves legislators to go implement it. That's not the way the California Constitution is. The California Constitution is a conglomerate of laws that are passed. So Proposition 218 then immediately becomes a part of the California Constitution because it was passed by a vote of the people. And it requires local government to have a vote of the affected property owners, not voters, for any new or increased assessment before it could be levied. The proposition was passed on November the 5th, 1996, and became effective in 1997. But of course, like anything else, there are exceptions. And we learned that when we started talking about sewage rates, refuse collection, stormwater districts. Those are accepted. Those particular items, and we're going to talk about, we're going to have a nice talk about sanitation district. Those items only need to be approved by the board. They are specific exceptions in Proposition 218. So we'll talk about how the board is helping you spend your money later. It should really be clearly understood that it was the intent of Proposition 218 to protect taxpayers. You know, we all realize that local government needs revenue, and we also know that there's going to have to be ways that they can get it when it's really required. So they're really trying to protect you, the taxpayer, so that you, in fact, are not besieged with a request for payment. The agency is also required to conduct a public hearing no less than 45 days after the mailing of the notice of the proposed fee or charge. Now, I want you to understand that that is no less than 45 days. So if we go to our local government and say, you know what, well, we'd really like you to postpone this, the public hearing so we have a chance to do things, and they say, oh, but there's a 45-day requirement? Well, it's 45 days minimum. So they could have given us more. The other thing is that if, in fact, it is one of those exceptions to where the board will make the decision, if written protests against a proposed fee or charge are presented by a majority of the owners of the identified parcel, the agency shall not impose a fee or change. So when it is an issue of, let's raise the sanitation district. Well, let's use stormwater, because we're not going to talk about that tonight. Let's raise the stormwater fee. And in order to stop that, if the board wants to do it, you have to get 50% plus one of every property owner to say no. You know how hard that is? Okay. But there are some limits as to what they can ask us for. So we really, this is really a good thing. Revenues derived from the fees or charges shall not exceed the funds required to provide the service, the related service. So they can't collect more and use it somewhere else. It may not be used for any purpose other than that for which the fee or charge was imposed. So if they're collecting these fees, they have to book and they have to account and they have to use these fees only for what they were intended for. In addition, the fees shall not exceed the proportional cost of service attributed to that parcel. So someone has to decide. And they have to get someone to make a determination of how much the cost is attributed to that parcel. And unless the service is actually used by or immediately available to the owner of the property, the fees or charges based on potential or future use of a service are not permitted. And that's why Friendly Valley won't get charged for another 2 years. And that's why we're going to question why the Soledad district got charged a year before their service was available. No fee or charge may be imposed for general governmental services. So those kind of services are, let me see, but not limited to police, fire, ambulance, library, where the service is available to the public at large. If the service is available to the public at large, that's called a general benefit. That's a benefit that would require them, if they wanted to raise the fee, to get a majority vote of greater than 2/3. And that's not something that they could use a district, an assessment district, for. Because they need to make sure that they have a special benefit. And that is a benefit conferred on real property. And is extremely different and is not necessarily a benefit to the public at large. General enhancement of the property value also does not constitute a special benefit. That's words right out of Proposition 218. So if someone turns around and says, like it says in the LMD engineer's report, that by doing this, we're going to raise your property values. Okay, that's nice, thank you very much, but you can't use that to justify this. A general benefit, as we said before, is a benefit that's available to the public at large. And some of the reasons why I'm going through this, and we're laboring our way through it, is not to put you to sleep, but so that when we start talking about what happened, you actually understand it. Because otherwise, it just sounds like a bunch of city gibberish, unless you know what they're actually talking about. So why didn't you know more about this issue before today? Or maybe before the city council meeting, when it came up at the city council meeting? Because the city only notifies the property owners affected by the assessment district vote. So if you weren't affected, I wasn't affected. I didn't get a letter saying we're going to go do this. They didn't have to notify me by law at all. This is part of the issue of transparency that we've been discussing for a very long time. That it wouldn't it be nice if there was if they listed every single notice on a website, so you didn't have to find out about it by having someone else call you and say, "Hey, I just got this letter. What's this all about?" And that's exactly how I found out about it. The LMD election process was kicked off on June 28, 2011 as a consent calendar item. You know what the consent calendar is? Those are things at the beginning of the meeting that city staff believes are a slam dunk, everybody agrees with, no problem, no discussion. We'll just take them all at once and we'll say, everybody agree? And they all agree, and there's no discussion at all. So that title of that was Landscape Maintenance District Resolutions Initiating Proceedings, Approving an Engineering Report, and Taking Other Related Actions. So obviously you knew that you needed to really pay attention to this. I'm just kidding. Because if you would have went in and you would have read the staff report, you'd have seen that it said various actions required by law to modify the assessment methodology and rates for various zones in landscape district numbers 1 and T1. City Council adoption resolution 1164 to initiate proceedings and make certain designations in connection with proposed annexations into, detachments from, creation of new zones, dissolution of existing zones, and assessment rate adjustments in landscape maintenance district number 1 and T1, and adopt. Obviously, you would have just jumped right out of your chair, right? But in fact, when you're going to see what they did, yeah, it's pretty clever. But I'm not sure it's going to stand. And that's part of it, is the fact that this is city speak. And so most people, when they hear it, don't understand what they're saying. Proposition 218 says that all assessments shall be supported by a detailed engineer's report prepared by a registered professional engineer certified by the state of California. And boy, they must certify a whole bunch of these people. Must be easy to get certified, too. So, since there was supposed to be an engineer's report, well, guess what? There was. City of Santa Cruz engineer's report about, same thing, annexations, detachments, new zones, assessment rate adjustments for various zones. And it was 71 pages. 71 pages long. Now, Proposition 218, by the way, I printed out in Word, was 6 pages. The League of California Cities handbook of how to implement it is 113 pages. Okay. And of course, easily tell us what we're doing in the engineer's report was 71 pages. And what it did, when they detached all of these different zones and then said, we're going to annex them all into this new zone, made it sound like everybody's getting a new assessment. But that's not true. Some of the people in District Zone 1 had never been in the LMD before, while all of the others, or the majority of the others, let's say, put it that way, the majority of the others were seeing a reduction in what they were going to be charged. So, not quite the same thing if you've never been in one before or if you're going to see a reduction. And what they did was they combined zones with different special benefits. If you've been around us a long time, you remember we've talked about LMDs and we've talked about Whites Canyon, and originally the city told us, no, LMDs, medians only, forget side panels. No, they can't be done. But in fact, throughout the whole time, since the city's been a city, there have been LMDs that have taken care of different pieces of property other than medians. Now, combining zones with different special benefit to me is a little disingenuous, because some of the zones were to start new medians. Some of the zones were to change the mix of who was in a zone to take care of side panels, parks, paseos, landscaping, all different kinds of things. And so some zones had assessment reductions, and some zones were new zones altogether, but they all voted as one unit, and the way this election was set up is, if it passed, everybody was in. So with that, we have a fine gentleman here, Jim Farley, and what Jim did was he went and asked for the election results. Since this is a 218 property owners election, the ballots become public record, unlike a secret ballot where they don't. And you can see who voted what, where. And so he did an analysis on this, and so I'd like to welcome Jim, and he can talk to you about how the election took place.